with a doodle poll on this. Well, just a poll to see if this will work. If you go back to the original work plan, and from the session, the idea of having an opportunity to have a joint meeting between this subcommittee of the Early Learning Council and the Equity Subcommittee of the Early Learning Council. Their next meeting is on October 18th, so I'll send out a poll to see if there's enough members of this committee that could join in with that in that meeting to see if that would work. So I'll try to get that out this week to see if that will work for folks. I'm going to hand it over to Tom.
Oh, hand it over to me. Okay, so if you recall, there were 3 areas which we were reviewing. A couple meetings ago, we reviewed Area 1, Impact of Early Learning Systems on Children and Families. And these were slightly edited to reflect comments. This is what we, Area 2, worked on last time, Access to Early Learning Services. Why don't you take a moment to read through that and see if I adequately captured your comments. I went back and listened to the recording this morning, and whoops, obviously I didn't number them correctly.
That was a test.
That was the test. Okay, I'll edit later. Sorry for that. Oops, no, first one. I'll try not to make you seasick.
So the goal is just to go back through these and make sure that this edited version, key question, are early learning system investments improving the lives of children and families furthest from opportunity? Did this capture the discussion from last time in the edits?
And I know there were a bunch of comments about how it was shaping up through your conversation that it's kind of a phased developmental progression through these, and so it makes sense with the key question, are we improving the lives of children and family? That's kind of the big prize. And then what are the services? Are they prioritized to reach furthest from opportunity? Are they located in communities with high concentrations of families? Furthest from opportunity, are the services engaging the children and family? Are they able to seamlessly transition? And any barriers that prevent children and families from participation?
I think a question that came up and when I talked to the people in our with this was that whole furthest from opportunity in the state, looking at it at these real kind of rural communities, their definition of furthest away from opportunity as opposed to some of the, metro and stuff is, when we throw that out, how will that be looked at? And I think that was one of the questions that kind of came up. And I don't know if your group, you guys are in the same boat kind of as we are as far as more rural and that type of thing.
I think that may be also a really great topic for conversation to dive in when we do that joint meeting with the Equity Committee.
And this might be more of a, when we step back and look at all of the key questions and sub-questions kind of together when we take a step back. But I was just noticing that the key questions under 1 and 2 are very, very similar in terms of their phrasing. And honestly, when I was I couldn't remember back to our conversation, so I was just kind of doing a quick go-through of it again. I think that there needs to be a distinction between the two pieces, that if we're really talking about access under number 2, that there needs to be, the key question needs to elicit that rather than, the only difference between key question 1 and key question 2 is the improving healthy development piece. So that's a little bit of wordsmithing, but I think that if what we're trying to get to is the essence of the impact on children and families, which it's more about the developmental progress there, And the second piece is about access, that maybe there's a different way to phrase those questions to get at those two different pieces of that. I don't know. So that was just kind of taking a little bit step back, looking at those two pieces together. And then I'll just add this, that question or sub-question 2.4 is the exact same question under System Coordination 3.2, which I think, again, it's like you're talking about access and then you're also talking about coordination. It does, I think it can fit under those two pieces, but access is entry point and coordination is how you move through the system to me. And so that question, in my opinion, would fit more under the coordination piece than the access piece. But I think some people might disagree.
I'm new to this language and obviously the iterations that you've been through before, but I guess that was the thing that was sticking out to me is like this coordination question within this, to me, what it read as equity. And maybe, well, I mean, you came up with that, so there was a reason why it fit. And I guess that you previously had something about demographics as that in that question area, and that my guess is getting captured some other place, and that's why it's not getting asked in that kind of block of questions around equity.
We took the demographics one out because it seemed more like a way to measure than an actual kind of key policy question. And I know folks made the distinction last time that was really, that question was more of a way, an indicator of whether these were, getting addressed. So I think that's why it got cut.
So that it's not just is it happening or not, rather it's like how is it happening, and that or just like it's not about process, it's about it didn't fit that kind of set of questions.
Yeah. That's
Just one thought to go to Dorothy's comment. I'm wondering, I think it may have been we played with this language rather than having investments improving the lives. Maybe the question for this section is simply, is it reaching those families? As a way of sort of differentiating from the first set of questions, which are on the impacts. And this is to make it more explicitly just on the access piece.
So don't change the advice you gave before. That's what you're telling me. Don't mess with your work.
I was trying to be diplomatic.
Thank you. Yeah, you should have.
I think almost looking at it, kind of backwards, are we going to get through these questions, like what Dorothy said, the information on the specific topics that we really want. And so sometimes, almost kind of reading it, I want to see if we're getting better access. Does this question how they do instead of it just, because people are going to be filling this out. The people that really do the work and stuff on that end of it.
And I think the idea with these high-level questions is that these would serve as a guidepost, and as we're doing evaluations in other projects, we develop much more detailed and specific questions. But this is almost like a checklist to help us and parts of the early learning system develop more in-depth questions when doing this kind of analysis.
I had also, I don't know who put the move to section 3 with the 2.4. Are the children and families able to seamlessly transition to an early learning system? I wondered, what that question meant in terms of access versus coordination.
That's what I mentioned too. Yeah.
In section 3, let's see. Oh yeah, seamlessly. Okay. Yeah. With more coordination. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So I didn't know if 2.4 needed. I mean, if it should be deleted or not, because I don't know how it ties into access.
If you delete 2.4, there's less renumbering you have to do.
Yes.
Or was there, you had mentioned maybe a possible way of kind of changing that question to still get some information.
Well, I was thinking more of the key question piece for that was just ensuring that the key question was really getting at this idea of access. And I appreciate what you said about equity. Like a lot of the questions aren't just about access, but also equitable access.
I mean, that's what I'm assuming reaching is about, right? It's like geographic and race and ethnicity. That's what you're talking about, right? Okay.
But that's a good question. You can't assume.
I mean, reaching, I guess to your point of the language implies geography, or it could invoke that sense of place or distance. But I'm guessing this is about equity, right?
Yeah.
These are, yeah.
I think the idea is, are the families that we're intending to make sure have access and opportunities actually have access?
And are they prioritized too, right? That's
Yeah.
the strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we take a look at section 3 then? So actually, I want to make sure I should have made. Do any of the committee members on the phone have anything to add on section 2 before we move on? Sorry, I realize it can be hard if you want to move in.
No, I'm ready to move on.
This is totally, I hate the wordsmith, but the first 3.1, how do early learning organizations align and coordinate family services? I feel like when I hear family services, what I think about are like DHS and that kind of thing, and what maybe makes me feel more comfortable is align and coordinate services for children and families, which indicate a wider range of programs, and that's what we're trying to assess as early learning hubs, or as an early learning system, sorry, not hubs, but a system. And then 3.5, I was just thinking about, instead of the question, and I see it a couple times, the how are rather than are, is this happening, but how is it happening?
Right.
I feel like asking that how question, how are culturally specific community-based organizations and services effectively integrated partners in early learning system? It helps give a different kind of answer than is it happening. You're actually able to articulate the ways in which different organizations are integrated into the system.
Making them all open-ended
Rather than a
instead
yes
of
and a
just,
no.
yeah.
You're good at this.
And this is me not even 100%.
And that might just that suggestion across the board with all whether it's goal 1 or 2, just that phrasing, I think is helpful. Lots of people say, yes, we're doing that.
So, do there seem to be any major sort of gaps or things that we want to be asking to know if there is an effective family-centered early learning system in place that we wouldn't get at just through these questions?
This may be too fine of a point, but it's almost like 3.3b. It's 3.3, what are the barriers? And I wonder if there should be a question like, how are barriers overcome, or how are they addressed?
Mm-hmm. That's what I was just thinking too, is there should be something on the positive frame of mind, like how have we changed the way that we operate as a system to overcome those barriers?
So when I was looking at 2 and 3, the questions 2 and this is question 3, and then looking back at question 2, I tried to in my head tie them back to our original question number 1. And so like maybe this is an opportunity to tie in the continuous quality improvement part that is listed in like 1.6, you know, thinking about not just articulating what the barriers are, but what are your efforts, the continuous quality improvement efforts the community is using to address the barriers maybe,
Or just, you know, you've got what are the barriers, and then like you said, that second one, how are these barriers being addressed? How and if or are these barriers being addressed?
A little bit what's missing sometimes is like acknowledging the process. Because like that still can lead to like, these are the barriers and this is what we're doing. And then maybe they continue to be the barriers. But it's like I want to kind of revisit the process of like, so it's easy to say these are the barriers and this is what we've done. And then acknowledge that it's still lack of improvement. I guess. But I want to kind of circle back to like, now what are we going to do then? So somehow articulating, I guess, the process components, if these are meant to be like really broad questions. This is like, this is not detailed questions. These are really broad, process reflective thinking questions. If they weren't, then I would want to know more, maybe more yes and no, like instead of how are, but are they?
It's okay for me to pipe in with something. Looking at 3.4, doing that notion of these supposed to be sort of high-level, broad. Just a question: is blending and braiding too specific a focus on a specific strategy, and would it make more sense to reframe this to be a little bit broader, or something like how are resources aligned to achieve collective impact, rather than assuming that blending and braiding?
Yeah. That kind of seems like it's a buzz term, but just asking, yeah.
I was just thinking, I like the align or leveraged language better because in the blended and braided framing, you can think specifically about financial money resources, but when you talk about aligning or leveraging resources, you can also be talking about people power, which is often what we have the ability to do as a system more often than blending and braiding funds.
I was replying to somebody on there. So, was there a specific wording then?
You said align. I mean, I think align.
Resources aligned and leveraged.
Yeah.
Here? Instead of
Yeah.
blended and braided?
Yeah.
Can't help but thinking of ponytail stuck in the KitchenAid. It's hard when everybody's watching you. It's like, yeah, no kidding.
I'm bad enough with one person behind me. And then I'll work, come up with some wording for this, and we can review it then.
Brian, Colleen, or Cade, you want to jump in?
Okay. I think that's because we challenged you last time, so I think this is pretty impressive with what you've done.
We're doing a weighting strategy at each meeting. We determine different people that are going to bring up a lot of comments. I think I was the most annoying at the last meeting, so I have to be minimally annoying at this.
It's all good. Everyone should jump in. I have one more question. I don't know if this is being too micro now, we're in the opposite direction. When I'm looking at this, one of the things that is potentially missing for me is questions around data and information sharing components. I don't know if that's captured elsewhere in these questions, or is it something that's worth capturing specifically as part of system coordination?
I think my assumption of the data information sharing went to, I think it's probably just like my assumption is the, where was it at? It's the transitioning, seamlessly transitioning from one program to the other.
Mm-hmm.
In there, in my head, lies the data sharing, but that's not it.
I agree. I think it should be, because we're eventually going to be, asking this. How are they tracking it? What's that? I think we need to be specific. I think that's a key one to throw back in there. I'm not sure where.
Okay, so it's like 3 point, yeah. So, for the tiny little example of one little family, like if they want to transition from, healthy families to Head Start, like that can't happen as seamlessly as, like for the family, like from their perception without data sharing, but then thinking about their own protections and rights. It's a big complex.
And I think there's a lot that we're going to be able to learn from that across the different hubs, how people are going about that.
So I would, and maybe the question can be worded broadly about how information is being shared and analyzed across programs or, in an aligned system, only because I think that it works at a family level, but also at a broader level where you use data sharing and able to understand if you are reaching your furthest from opportunity. So that the coordinated aligned system, a lot of these questions should also impact the way that you answer your questions around access and supporting children around their developmental progress. So does that make sense? So the data question, however it's asked, that it's broad enough that you can answer it in a way that it impacts a single family, but also you can step back and answer it can be answered in a way that how are you sharing data so that you can look at it to know if you're really reaching a population.
So I was thinking like the data sharing should not only be in question 3, but question 1 about defining impact.
Mm-hmm.
Question 1.
Like the utilization of data?
I guess so. So you can speak to whether or not you are reaching children and families for this opportunity. Because if you aren't sharing data more broadly, not just specific from helping one family get this to here, if you're not sharing data more broadly among all the other like CEOs, how do you know you're reaching children for this opportunity? Right now, like those children and families for this opportunity, we don't know who they are yet.
Right.
So could you say, how are you using data systems or data to show,
like ensure that
or just even to show your impact? Do you want it to be like to ensure that you're doing it, or it's being able to describe? What's the answer you want out of that?
I think the question for me is like, what's your resource, and being able to articulate the answers to these questions.
Instead of just,
because we're looking at collective impact, so it should be from the voice of one, like, one entity versus a bunch of different. Maybe that's the technical assistance part, like the ELC.
Yeah, and maybe this can be edited 1.7 to include that.
I feel those two different. That you want to be a little bit, in my opinion, to be a little more specific. Like where you were starting with it. How are you actually collecting this stuff to be able to get to these things?
Is there a way that you could embed that in 1.5 or 1.6? Seems like both of those could also that same kind of function.
Yeah, maybe it's also implied in there in the how, right? Because they're still not getting back down to the nitty-gritty. We're still trying to be like really high-level questions. So the how, like each entity could describe the how.
I think there's nothing wrong with being a little specific, but not assuming at this point. Yeah.
Is 1.7, does that fit here, or is that better in coordination?
I see it's still more there because you're talking about state funded and affiliated. And I see more the ones on the 3 is kind of more, what are you doing more with your own kind of system and stuff. But I think this would be good information for the early learning division to know, hey, what can we still be doing to help?
And we'll have another chance to.
Not specifically saying data. Doesn't specifically say data collection.
Out with that bit. I'm wondering if there could be something on that word.
Are people on the phone able to hear? Okay.
I think it's still okay. I think it's a combination of 1.5 and 1.6 because it's not differentially impacted, and then we have CQI.
And we will have a chance to look at all of these questions collectively and do another look to make sure that things are actually in the right place.
Can I just understand differentially impacted? That's not disproportionately impacted? That's not what you're trying to say there. That's not different. What does differential mean?
In my head, it goes to like it speaks to equity.
So it's not disproportionately different.
That's my biggest rub is I think as we're, trying to say, wow, I could look at this way and I could, however we phrase these, so it's like we've eliminated those gray areas and, we really, people are starting to answer these and it'll be like, oh, I know exactly what they were asking.
Do you want to say something about evidence there?
Well, that's where I was thinking. It's like if you want to stay away from the word data, would you want to say something?
Maybe it's the evidence. Yeah, I like evidence.
Like,
better.
how do you know you're having an impact? What evidence are you using to give you confidence or something like that? Just put data for now to remind me.
Describe your evidence or articulate. I don't mind the gray questions because again, I think that's like the purpose of the gray questions and gray answers.
Should we flip back to 3? I just want to make sure we're. So should we take these edits and then we'll come back to the group with all the questions collectively?
And when we take a kind of step back, and I'm trying to remember back to our very first meeting, but me personally, like the flow of the questions themselves, the key questions feels a little bit off because I always start from the place of aligned, coordinated, and family-centered systems. Because if the way that these questions are being utilized is like a framework to think about our entire system and as a way that they're going to drive other kinds of like look at programs that we're funding as a state, it feels like the first place you go is that coordinated aligned system because that piece needs to happen and happen well in order for these other pieces to happen. I mean, that's kind of
that was one of the reasons to come back and look at them collectively.
Okay.
Is we started to have that conversation last time about the order. It seemed like it makes sense just to go through the sections individually and then return to the question of order. But that was, I think, exactly what Buffy was asking about last time.
Okay.
So you're saying, like, are they aligned and coordinated? Do kids and families have access, and are they impacted?
Yeah, exactly. Look, you read my mind. But that is, the kind of the frame that I think of when I think of kind of early learning system.
And I think we actually did them in this order because simply the systems questions are often the hardest questions. We thought we would start with, thinking about what questions to ask about impact on children and families seems more straightforward. That was the internal logic for starting there. But I think we can come back to that at the end. Okay.
To the Big Apple for today?
Yeah. So I thought we had a really wonderful discussion about principles and an approach for thinking about how to create incentive metrics in this short time cycle. And then just to go back to the starting premise of this conversation, I think there was a recognition that we're in a very short time crunch. The amount of time that the hubs would have to both complete this process and then actually do something with the resources is pretty limited, and that given where we are in the cycle, we're really sort of looking in some sense at something retrospective than something that's really truly incentive in the truest sense of the word. And I just wanted to put that back on the table because I think that helps guide some of the selection, both of the approach and of some of the principles. I think part of the idea that was also behind some of that discussion last time is given these constraints, the principles, goal, and approach might be very different from this cycle than if, for instance, the Early Learning Council next contract cycle also decides to do incentive pullback.
In the discussion that I filled out the little Survey Monkey thing was have some people to help me with that in our hub. And the questions that they had were, what's the real purpose of the incentive at this point in time? And that they weren't doubting it or anything. Was it just like think that question? Is it a financial incentive? And then they came back to what they felt like would be more equitable, would be more kind of an innovative, putting funding into innovative funding, I think is how they described it. And that seemed to open that door to more to whether you've got a hub that's been going for 2 or 3 years or you've got one that's just, and I'm just kind of sharing their feedback. I shared with them that was that question, okay, we throw in there, here's the incentive. Can we articulate back why we really feel like that needs to be in there right now?
I wish there were some of the council members that with us today. It really came out of the council deliberation last summer. But I think, let me see if I can sort of do my best channeling. I did tell her, if you hear me kicking the walls, that she should come hearing it. I think that. Sorry, I'm trying to do my best.
That's okay. I know it's kind of they kind of were showing. It seems like we get kind of the cookie cutter thing, like this is kind of what's supposed to happen, and then it's like, okay, let's look at where we really are. Is it best to try and do this and then maybe get something like, oh, we're down a road that I wish we would have taken more time, and maybe it is the innovative, or it's just that next cycle. What's the big? Is there a big push? And again, they weren't being negative. It was just questions.
So my sense of what was motivating the council was that the incentive holdback played a number of purposes, one of which was a way of signaling that the hub transformation really was to make sure that business was not done as usual, that it was a way of sort of emphasizing the sort of transformative aspirations of the hub system, and that part of that transformation, transformative aspirations, was about making sure that there was a focus on changing outcomes. So I think that was the sort of motivation for the incentive holdback.
So is there enough history in there with, how long has what's your, not what's the name, but how long has the most senior hub been operating?
This point, it will be approaching 3 years in January.
And your most rookie hub?
Would be approaching
A year.
Yeah.
a little over 1 year, about
Okay.
15 months.
Oh.
At this point.
So is it, using that phrase that, equitable, like we're talking about and what that means, is it even really possible for a 3 and a 1? however we're setting that up so that is, so it's not, you know, a competition between maybe someone that's, hey, you know, we're a big county, we can, our hub is just one county, and then you have some of these others that have 4 or 5, and it took them a lot longer to get hooked in together. Will this allow that to be equitable across the board, or, you know where I'm kind of going?
I think that's something we should really put on the table as we go through the composite. So I think the goal for this discussion was to go over those goals, principles, and approach, make sure that they captured the conversation, and then based on that, we were instructed as staff. So Sue, Denise, Tom, and I were working on it to put together a couple composites to throw back at you for reaction. And I think the idea of the composites was less to sort of say, here's 4 options, vote for your favorite, but to have sort of 4 options with variations in it to further help this group refine it. So I think the goal was to, let's go back to these goals, principles, and approach, then go through each of the 4 composites individually and talk about strengths and weaknesses, and then see if we can then come back, having gone through each of those composites individually and pulled out what posting to the strengths and weaknesses of the approach, see if we're starting to, as a group, hone in on a common direction. Does that make sense as an approach for today? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's go back to that last slide and just make sure that I'm just going to read this out because I think it's so goal. This was really, I think, the central part of the discussion last time. Incentive metrics to demonstrate that the hub and its community partners are taking actions that show collective ownership of a shared vision and shared outcomes for commonly defined populations of children and families. And then the principles that were discussed were, and please let us know if this didn't capture the conversation accurately, incentive metrics to reflect the impact of hubs across goals in a way that is focused, transformative, and clear about where the hubs have true impact. Incentive metrics must reflect the necessity of collective action, fostering engagement from parents and community-based organizations, as well as health, human services, K-12, early education, and the private sector. Incentive metrics should reflect the stage of development of hubs and the hub system. I think it's part of also what you were just getting at. Incentive metrics must have a data source that is readily accessible, reliable, and valid. Incentive metrics should be able to be measured and assessed objectively and consistently across hubs. We also looked at that. Incentive metrics should not send a, sorry, this was my best attempt to phrase something that came at the end of the meeting. I never could figure out a nice, clean phrasing for it, but incentive metrics should not send an inappropriate message about the priority of one hub strategy or area of focus over another, i.e. tell hubs that particular strategy activity is where they should be putting their energy when that's not the intended message. And then the approach that came out of the last discussion was a composite metric that is parsimonious across types of metrics and areas of focus.
So David, one way you might, for part 7, is I felt like what we were talking about is that the sense, given that each of the strategies is equally important and that there isn't a weighting across the strategies, that the goal was that the incentive metrics would have parsimony, whatever composite would have parsimony across the strategies so that you weren't inadvertently, by picking incentive metrics, prioritizing certain areas over another.
And I think that was what the idea that I was getting at in the parsimonious across areas of focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry, what does parsimonious mean? Is that the appropriate word here? I think is because
frugal and cheap, right?
That's what we had to all look it up.
I know. I was like,
Holly, because you were the one who introduced the term, you want to?
Oh, that's so funny because I'm thinking, from a measurement point of view, parsimony is a term that's often used where you're trying to make sure that in narrowing you're being comprehensive, and that you're from a measurement. It's so funny. I've never even thought about it not used in a measurement component. That what you're picking, that when you're thinking of a parsimonious measure, it's a measure that is comprehensive while not needing, but also being very resource thoughtful in terms of picking ones that are flags, but that and comprehensive, but that you know you don't have a lot of, you can't have a lot of depth. You can't pick everything. that make sense? So there is an element of like, you only have so much. So when you only have so much, you want to be parsimonious in the sense that you're being comprehensive, you're addressing the key areas that need to be addressed, and you're making sure that you touch on key parts, but you don't have enough resources to be able to dive deep in any one component.
I kept in this context thinking of Occam's razor. So the idea that you want the explanation that is both that has full predictive power but is simplest is the one that you want to lean towards.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Occam's razor?
Yeah.
That's another one.
Yeah, that was a stat class.
That's
yeah,
so funny. In grad school, I had a whole class that was around parsimonious measures. So it's funny. Like now I'm like, that is interesting. Yeah.
So like the most efficient?
Efficient while still being comprehensive.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. Hard, what's hard with this is we want parsimony by data source. Like you want to make sure that you're not having all your measures using one type of data source, and you also want comprehensive in the sense that you want to address the different strategies, which is what I think you were trying to hit on 7.
There was a lot of degrees to figure out what that meant.
Well, if you look
something different. Well, and I think it's helpful because if this is going before, I mean, if this is a document that we're all kind of endorsing to go before the early learning councils, so that they understand what approach that we're, I mean, I don't know how many of them are going to have taken a data class to understand what parsimony means. So I think it's a fair word here, but I think about the future years and whether or not there might be a better way to express this so that if someone that doesn't have a data background is reading it can understand why we chose an approach like this.
I'll check that.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that you had to add parsimony. I actually don't see the word parsimony. I just think inappropriate in a measurement document. Maybe we might be thinking differently about that. So.
Yeah.
Okay. We will work on a translation.
And I think, sorry, just the 7, it struck me that all of the other ones were should be this and that one's a should not. And if there's a way to rephrase it, that it should be comprehensive and efficient in, some way of that.
I really tried to not have it written negatively and failed. There was triple negative.
Look, we're giving you another go at this, David. Try again.
What I want to get across, though, and this is what I heard really strongly, is we don't want to be sending a signal like, put all your eggs in this basket.
Yeah.
So I'll work on a way of getting rid of the underline not, but I'm not sure I will succeed.
Well, and it's not too bad because it's down at the bottom. So it's like, hey, pay attention. This one's a little different than that underline.
And then as we were sort of as staff working on trying to develop a couple composites, some other considerations came up that we thought we just wanted to share with this group. Denise or Sue, do you want to, you were part of the conversation, help with these? Sorry, I forgot the spot.
I can take a question on the bottom to just have some clarity on what that.
Yeah.
What are you thinking on that?
So I think on the idea is that we are so late in the game that we're not saying, here's the goal and we'll give you a year to reach the goal and then decide whether you get the award.
Yeah.
We're already 3/4 of a way or more than halfway through the contract cycle that we're in some sense going to be having to base it on the work that the hubs have already accomplished as it's up, in the last year rather than the work evaluating them, saying this is your goal from a year from now and coming back and evaluating them in a year. And that I think was just based on the reality of where we are in the budget cycle.
So I've been making my bed for a year, and now my parents are going to give me an allowance for making my bed, and so I want it to be retroactive for the year I was doing it.
Yeah, and I think the idea was, incentives are supposed to be prospective rather than retrospective,
yeah.
And this was just a call out based on given the timeline and when hubs will have to spend the resources.
So I feel like some of these considerations then are considerations that should be carried forward in future years, whereas that one is one that is really specific to this particular incentive year. Just looking at the should be equitable to hubs with limited staff, minimal extra work for the hubs. Those two in particular, I mean simple too. I would say the simple thing is kind of the approach piece to that, but taking into consideration the hubs with limited staff and it being minimal extra work for hubs, I think are really important considerations as we think about the next iteration of incentive metrics, because we're always going to be under a time pressure. We always are going to have reports to do and things to fill out, and so that's just, I don't know where these additional considerations fit in, if it is just another section of this guiding document or if it's a way that's embedded in the principles if we're thinking about moving forward, if some of these that move forward and ones that are specific to this particular incentive metric here.
And thinking one of the conversations we had too was making sure as we are developing the metrics for the next set of contracting that we have decided ahead of time what the incentive is so that hubs know going in as they're developing their work plans and strategies what is incentivized so it's not after the fact.
So we're kind of, what's that word, parsimonious? Thanks, Colleen.
I think the idea of simple was a little bit different than the parsimonious meaning, in the sense I think simple was not a huge amount of work to actually fill out the information and things like that.
Yeah, to your point, Dorothy.
Yeah.
So maybe simple is not quite the right word. It's more, you know.
Well, how would
Well, I
this
guess
simple,
minimal extra work for the hub, so yeah. Sorry.
how does simple, so, you know, we talked about 5 that they need to be measured above, you know. Because part of it is the simple is it's supposed to be pulled from what they're already reporting to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it is because of this retrospective part that we're having to kind of now say, well, how would we know? But the idea is in the future that within the specifications it would be clearer because you're pulling from what they're reporting.
So this brings up another question that's been rolling around in my head, which is, what is the process of the actual, like, what's the process, right? Like, is it a different document that we're filling out and we're checking boxes and answering, or is the burden really on the early learning division staff to be collecting this from sources that we already report through in order to complete it, and then who's reviewing it? So I'm sure that's not a conversation for today, but that is rolling around in my head as we think about the principles that we want moving forward.
Well, is it something you're being applying for, or is it something you're being rewarded for because you already did that?
And I think as we go through the different examples of composites, that's a great question to ask. Like, where is there just information that could be pulled by ELC staff, and where there isn't? Yeah. If we added for the last one, the retrospective made it clear that's for this cycle, would folks be comfortable sort of adding this to the document?
Can you help explain the one right above that, the not suggest a new set of activities for the hubs to take on? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
It's a little bit sort of like that last principle of, just as we don't want to introduce a metric that would say, incentive metric that would say, put all your eggs in this basket. I think there was a sense that you also don't want to create an incentive metric that says, here's this new line of work that you guys have been doing that you were never told to be doing. So maybe this is so obvious it doesn't even need stated, but like, see if I can make up one off the top of my head.
You can't even think of one. So that's okay.
Could number 7 be like incentive metrics should be tied to existing areas of, areas of hub focus?
Yeah, local focus is what I was thinking about.
Yeah, like incentive metrics should be tied to existing hub areas of focus, and use a variety of, the variety of types of metrics. Like, because that's when I think of parsimonious, I think of 2 things. One is it's tied across the hub metric areas, across the hub areas of focus, and then it uses a variety of, like, not just metrics, but data points, I guess, like like one of them had narrative, and then you know, like, it uses those two things, just saying, and it will always be will always be tied to, because the additional considerations, when I looked at should be equitable and simple, and then the minimal extra work, I was wondering, like from my point of view, but I was wondering from your point of view, like does the speaking to stages of development, does that kind of cover those three little additional considerations?
I would not think so, because even hubs that might reach the point of being 5 years old or whatever, you know, kind of in a middle-aged stage of development or whatever it might be, they still might have pretty limited staff, and so limited capability in terms of completing a new process.
You know what determined it? If there's only 2 staff or, you know, a 3-county region, they're pretty limited compared to one that may have 6 staff.
So I think the idea for number 4, just to give a bad example, would be like, I think folks would be pretty upset if the incentive metric said something like, demonstrate how well you've been aligning with the transportation sector in your community. Right. There might be reasons to do that, but if this is the first time that hubs are hearing that, that doesn't seem particularly fair. So.
There's names that will call you that you'll never see.
Yeah. You know, I think that's a particularly egregious example, but I could also imagine things that would come up that might not seem at first blush that way, but might actually be that way. So I think that was the idea of why we wanted to call it out explicitly.
It almost gets back to number 7 as well, about honoring local focus and what hubs determined in the metrics where there are more pressing issues in their community based on data or what's happening. So that, I think that's part of that as well, really thinking about that.
I do appreciate the way that you phrased, Emily, you've kind of rephrased that question around local areas of focus, because when I think about the different areas of focus, our 3 goals as early learning hubs, which are the same as early learning system, but there is opportunity within each of those goals to have focus also.
I think one of the things that we talked about as a staff too around data points versus metrics that I'd be curious, especially for the hub leaders here, is that there's also been discussion about if the metrics are in a developmental stage at the same time as the hubs are in a developmental stage. So where do you see, when you're thinking of data points, where do you see some level of where's the best place to be held accountable at this phase? Is it a metric? Is it a data point? Is it something that hubs also, what your thoughts about that? You know what I'm asking?
I've been doing all the talking, Christy, so I need to give my voice a rest.
In thinking about the broader system, data points for consistency, but then also, I mean, because it has to be something that you can accurately measure across all 16 hubs, and what you do in a rural hub versus how it looks in an urban hub are going to be completely different. And so without having some type of consistency for data point, I think it opens up too large of a gray area. I don't know, Dorothy, you want to add? You can ask your question. Oh, ask your question again. Making sure
I think which the metric or data points is more reflective of the stage of development, because the metrics are in stages of development too. Is that what you were mentioning?
And I think this is something as we go through the composites, we'll.
So that's what I was just thinking, is if we get through the composites,
So
it
our
helps
vote would be, as we talked about, fine with us adding, since staff came up with this, I didn't want to just add it to the document, but it seems like there were some important extra considerations.
Yeah.
So we'll work on that and then add it to the official document. If everyone's okay with that? Okay.
Well, so to that question, if we're looking at the, I don't know if you want to introduce what the composites are. I guess I was confused by that idea that if you want a consistent measurement across the hubs, but there's ability to be developmental, like you want both of those at the same time.
So I think what we're going to find, and the feedback is, and this was true from the very first hub metrics work, there's actually tension between our principles, and I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to grapple with. There's some of the consistency across hubs, objectivity of measures, developmental stage, how we're going to balance all of these principles. I think it's going to,
And local focus.
and local, came out. I think will come out in the conversation. So, so I think the idea that we're talking about is we sent you out in advance.
How did that happen?
4 different composites, and we tried to sort of make them have sort of different qualities to them to sort of help focus the conversation today. And we got feedback from some folks, but we thought we'd just go through and try to capture strengths and weaknesses of the different composites. I'm going to wait for Tom to come back.
Tom asked me to flip the slide.
Okay.
If we need to.
Okay. Well, I guess we want to take notes. So.
Oh, okay.
Sue, do you want to do that? Yeah. I think we can. Yeah, if we go to the next slide. I think there was supposed to be a note slide. I'm not sure. Let's see what the next slide has up.
Composite 2.
Oh, is it composite 2? Okay.
Oh, no.
It's composite 1. Okay, so these were the composite. These were the comments that we were sent in advance of composite 1. And I would say that composite 1 is the most. Here are the existing set of metrics that hubs were asked to perform. And as Colleen has pointed out, they're really indicators more than metrics. And these are the indicators that hubs were asked and are in their contracts. This version of composite sort of takes the existing one and basically does a checklist.
I mean, it's certainly more clear and more, but I mean, there are still qualities in here where it's, I mean, I think to someone's comment, like demonstrated partnerships with culturally specific CEOs, like how many and what does that look like? And I mean, there's still some,
the evidence.
Yeah, like qualitative element to what that gets evaluated, but definitely more specific.
And I think that I shared this with a few other hub leaders. I think that what stuck out to them in this composite was particularly the net target for well-child visit piece, because they felt like, sure, they could put that on there, but it wasn't really reflective of their work, because a lot of the hubs that I talked to didn't really do very much to actually meet that target. And so kind of like, sure, put it in there. I'm probably going to meet it, but we didn't really do any work. It's not actually reflecting the work that we've done as a hub. We've had a lot of hubs feel like they've had much more impact on the developmental screening target.
And I think for us, it was the term met overall, because when we set our baselines and targets, we weren't told there were incentives tied to it or could be incentives tied to it. And sometimes if you do a community process for that and you set a target, you might be able to get people to rally around support if you are very ambitious, and then to find out that, a year later that, oh yeah, and you're going to get measured on whether you met it or not. So my recommendation was within a range of that target. So it allowed for some that, really been doing substantial work, but weren't quite there as far as met.
Yeah. And can we capture how do you not penalize a hub for setting ambitious targets?
Right. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I guess just in terms of, I know I provided a lot of comment to this, but in terms of kind of the principle of kind of being equitable across different hubs, I think in some of the areas where the CCO denominator is quite small and completely overlaps with the hub denominator, and I know the measures are being calculated at a county level, I can see how potentially some of the work that the hub did could affect the CCO incentive metric. But for a lot of the areas, the denominator is just so much bigger than who the hubs serve. So while they may be improving communication about developmental screenings or improving follow-up, if you actually look like kind of at the end and did they actually impact the numerator, that's where I started to have concerns. So from a conceptual point of view, were they working on follow-up steps to those, making sure that there was follow-up to developmental screening, or making sure that within the hub providers that there was kind of assurance about well visits. Then I had a philosophical background, but because of how the metric is actually measured in the denominator and numerator, it isn't actually equitable in terms of whether a hub, given their scope, can impact it.
Brian or Kate, any?
So in terms of the unintended negative, I wouldn't want people spinning their wheels to get 96110 counts when that's not really what the point was. Having been on the original incentive metric, we noted this as a problem, and it was an issue of trying to get the topic developmental screening as a measure, but in terms of operationalizing how that measure is done and attribution to the hub, that's a different dynamic. And so, given my concerns about that, to put it at a higher level, it seems like it's almost hitting for me the set 0.7, which is the inappropriate message part.
Brian or Kate, did you guys have any comments?
I would agree with that. The ASQ is a interesting one for me because I think the purpose of it is great, like was mentioned, but I think it's there's a lot of things out of our control too.
I agree well that the metrics need to tell us something useful, and they also need to be measuring something that is under the control of the entity being measured. So if it fails either of those tests, then it's not a good metric.
And the issue go ahead, David.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, just for us personally here, the issue I'm running up against with, and I've tried it 5 different ways, I think, with the ASQ is medical providers and doctors' offices really, for lack of a nice way to put it, they're not meeting us halfway right now. So there's a significant amount of ASQs being done. I know how many ASQs are done, but the billing part is the problem, and I get that it's a CCO metric, but there's not much movement on it, and most of it is out of my control at this point until partners trying to change their mind on some things.
A lot of us, it also has to do with their data systems and information sharing. And so, no matter how much work that we do around it or increase of ASQs within our region, we can't get them to our CCO and get them counted.
But again, even in certain areas, even if you shared everything and all the 96110 is done for all of the kind of providers that are in the hub, if you look at the end of those kids, and I'm doing this in a number of counties, it potentially could not move the percentage up because the percentage is so big. The percentages continue, of all, whereas you guys as hub are thinking of high risk. So, if you think of like all the home visiting screens then, or all, it still in some areas wouldn't move the percent enough.
So if we went through, I just want to throw out a question. So one of the things, the feedback is what are the places where the hubs can have meaningful impact? Of the items in this composite list, which are the items that you see as the most potential for the hubs having meaningful impact?
Yeah, because I think one of the things, David, that I meant to note at the beginning is, part of not only are we kind of late in the game right now in terms of the metrics, coming up with incentive metrics that are kind of going retrospective, but we're also held to how the metrics were operationalized developmentally, where hubs were and what information which isn't where I think we're going to be in 5 years. So there's also like a state of development in terms of what metrics the hubs were asked to report on, and there was a feasibility burden there too.
I think as I'm looking at this composite list, and this could just be me, I don't know, but the QRIS one I think resembles the ASQ one just a little bit. I know in our region we've spent an awful lot of time meeting with providers, talking about QRIS, offering supports, all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if they don't want to do it, there isn't anything we can do about it. So I'm not sure, again, I think like ASQ, it's not something that we really have 100% control over. In fact, we don't even have a large percentage of control over it, unfortunately.
What percentage of control would you assign?
In our area, if you look at our statewide, I mean, if you look at our QRIS data, it's really, really low. And, you know, maybe it's just an Eastern Oregon mindset, but, you know, like I said, we had funding, as Umatilla Memorial Head Start had funding to specifically address or encourage QRIS, and most of it was providers, you know, that there isn't enough incentive for them to enter into that, regardless of how much presenting, training, free materials, all that other kind of stuff that we did. I mean, we did a lot, and yet the gains were very, very little. I doubt we even have 50% control over that in our region, because so much of it hinges on, does the provider need it, and maybe some of it's culture, because in this area also we have a large number of providers who are not regulated, and with families in this area, they don't care. It's okay with them. So there isn't the cultural peer pressure, I guess, in this area, at least yet, to make it something that is in demand.
Should we take a look at composite 2 and then go through them all and then look at them collectively?
The only thing I would add, David, is that, you know, if the committee agrees, and, you know, I know that composite 2 and 3 start to get at qualitative metrics, which I think raise a number of issues that people have to provide more information, that you guys don't, you know, you have to create a standardized way in which you would, across all of them, attribute a yes or no to a qualitative answer, which brings up a whole different ball of wax. But, you know, I think one of the parts that is within scope of hubs is follow-up and family resource management and care coordination, because those align with the goals for kids identified at risk for developmental screening. And so one way you could kind of keep with the concept is important and it needs to be aligned, but not hold to like the number, is to go with some qualitative assessments around work around that. The trick would then be how you grade it. So as we're talking about 2 and 3, for me, one of the problems I had is that some of the qualitatives were still anchored to qualitative discussion about the metric, where, you know, I might, where I didn't support it, whereas I might support qualitative discussions about how you're addressing the topic.
So let's see if we can unwind that thread as we go through these sections.
Right.
Maybe I missed something with composite 2, but it was, can you explain to me how that works? It's ABC, ABC, ABC. Would it be like, would the composite be one set of the 3 or all of them? I wasn't understanding how this was organized.
I think you need to correct me if I think it was sort of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things with 3 parts.
And that was a question that came up for me when in looking at all of them as we think about the composites. Would it be that you need to meet all of them? So like the composite 1 were 6 items. Would you need to meet all 6, or, you know, to allow that hub focus? Would it be, you know, 4 of 6, or how are you looking at that?
I think there's a couple different different ways, and that's something that this committee should discuss. It could be, you know, for instance, it could be that I'm just putting out some. I'm not saying any of these are the right ones, but just sort of saying, you know, one version would be, in order to get your lump sum, you need, there's 4 things you need to do all 4. It could be that for each 4 that you do, you get 25% of your sum. It could be that there are 6 listed and you have to do 4 to get the full amount, or 4 get, you know, those are, I mean, I think there's more variations, but I think that's up for discussion. Does that make sense? So strengths and weaknesses for composite 2. Can I go back? Can we go back to the slide before? I just want to ask a question, just based on the discussion. So one of the things that we were hearing is, while the quantitative metrics or those indicators can be measured consistently across hubs, they don't necessarily reflect the work that the hubs are doing, or hubs don't necessarily have much control. Question for some of these was, okay, just sort of asking to provide an essay, makes it very subjective, the grading of it. Is there a way to sort of get at what Colleen was saying, to sort of take some of these things, and is there something that's sort of more objective that could be unpacked underneath these concepts?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I mean, some of us at this table would be trying to help our hubs meet these, and then some of you at this table are going to have to be reading these. Right. How do you want to spend time for determining that? You're the teacher on this one and have to take home homework. Do you want to read a 4-page essay, or do you want to have, I mean, what's going to give you? That's hard for us to decide.
Well, but I think that is part of it. This group needs to provide input on it.
I see this as being a lot of work for hubs and for the ELD, because to truly do this in a way that across all hubs, you would have to develop a rubric in advance of giving these out to every single hub. You would have to have them reviewed by multiple people to get an average score based on that rubric, so that you would have more, it to be more objective. So, you know, that's and then you would probably not want that hub facilitator participating in the review of their hub. Also, I mean, that's a lot of ELD staff time, and that completely goes against the simple principle. I mean, it gets at where hubs are as a system, but it's a lot of work to do that.
Yeah, and it takes us away from maybe the real work.
If this was the one and there were a lot of questions, what's the timeline for when that would happen?
I think that still has to be figured out. So at the very least, this would still have to go through the council for first discussion and then a council for vote, which means the very earliest end of October for us to be even sort of
very earliest.
Very earliest for even us as staff then to develop a toolkit to go out to hubs.
And please don't send it out right at the holidays.
No.
Because that's when every grant application comes out, and it creates a nightmare.
I think that's probably even, that's the most, everything falls into place really quickly.
I was just thinking about our monitoring visits and starting in February, and then Eric questions how she'll need to complete for that.
Yeah.
From a workflow standpoint. And I would say about these and the development of these questions, and it is more subjective, was some of our concern about, you know, those 3 metrics and saying that Hubs met those targets when knowing the work and knowing that there is a lot of lack of control of some of those metrics, and how's another way of getting at the fact that they really are working on things they can control. What are the strategies that you're actually putting in place? How are you thinking about this?
So when I hear, can you take, I mean, like each one of the questions has an A, B, and a C. One is like a describe, one is like a list, and one is tell me about your indicator. Does it make the question more manageable if you just saw, for example, just the describing and then what are your indicators? And is that something that you are already tracking? And like, because when I hear too, like, you know, nobody wants anything to get in the way of, you know, what each of us perceive as our real work. But I'm also kind of wondering, like, what are, and when I look at these, I'm wondering, like, from way down here, like, I'm thinking this is the stuff that I'm thinking my hub is doing and tracking anyway. But I mean, that's just me way down here.
That's what the group I had kind of reviewed this with me, the same thing. And I had to say, hey, this is not, they start looking, well, we're doing this, and it said, that's all I'm asking you for your help. Mm-hmm. But they went to the same place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and it's always hard to be asked the same questions in a couple of different areas, but at the same time, that's sometimes what we do. We answer this. I mean, like, would it make it easier would it make it like easier to see and do if each thing just had an A and then a C, like 2 parts, each question could have 2 parts?
Because D, we could almost provide. We know what their baseline and what their targets are. It's in their contract.
You would just provide it, and then they are describing like their path moving forward. Like, and then because I thought somewhere in this is a merry mixture here of like the data and then the descriptive part. And it looks overwhelming because there's like 15 things here. But I don't think it needs to be that way. And I also think it's everything that I think you guys are doing.
What I'm noticing is that all of the metrics are the same from composite 1 to composite 2. We're looking at the same ones. In thinking about hub time and staff time, what if it was a blend of composite 1 and 2? So if they didn't meet it, then they had the option to provide this narrative around what they're doing. And so for hubs that have already met this or are doing this, and they're able to just give the data source and say, we've met this metric, there's not the time involved in a hub putting together a narrative and the ELD reviewing it. But if they haven't met the metrics, then they're able to describe their efforts towards and what barriers might be in the way for what they haven't met.
I'd be fine with some of those, that being true, but again, I would not be fine with the ones that I have concerns about in composite 1 being metric. So like MOUs, the first, sorry, let me get to the sheet. You guys have that up. Let me get to your survey so that I can see. Can you go to composite 1 just quick? It felt like we had a lot of conversation about the target parts. So I guess if you were saying, if they already meet 1, 2, 3, and I don't know how you guys want to handle the bottom 3, I could be fine with that. The problem is that I think we just talked about that within those 6, that there's some potential issues with 2 or 3 of them. And so for 2 or 3 of them, if we wanted to keep that focus on that topic, because again, we want to make sure that across the incentive metrics that we're highlighting, we're comprehensive in the different strategies, then for those ones, given where the metrics are, I think there's a qualitative component.
I'm trying to figure out how to capture that.
So who defines the target? Like how's, because I guess I just don't know that. Like, what's the hub defines the target. So then, if the hub is defining the target on its own, then it's not necessarily met or unmet. It becomes maybe a little bit inequitable because you defined your target before you were doing your work, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's why it's better. I think it's nice to get like the data from the ELD, and then you are describing what you're seeing, and then you're going to then be discussing like the indicators of success and where we want to move and where you want to move. If you're given the data and you take away like what your target is, or maybe you want to speak to what your target is and why it was a good one or not a good one, that could be. But then we go back to like the evaluating them in the rubric part. Mm-hmm.
Can we capture the weaknesses? There's just the need for a scoring rubric, a consistent scoring rubric.
And again, because I hear us being really concerned about burden, I like the idea of some that we may feel comfortable. They're not needing to be a qualitative, but another part that there is a qualitative component, but that it's smaller, and it kind of gives the hubs a heads up that in the future there's going to be these components, recognizing that with the short timeline that we have, it has to be only for a certain number because of the burden component.
So, sorry, I was just trying to understand the ones that we have. There have been concerns expressed about ones haven't. Out of composite one, the top, we talked about the bottom three. Did folks express concern about the top three? I mean, those are kind of like check the box that we have them, or demonstrates with evidence that you have MOUs, for example. But so that's the question: were there concerns about the top three out of composite one, or was it really around the bottom three? Where we spent a lot of our time conversing about so far.
I think there was questions, but I mean, it seems like those could be addressed those different ways, like describe what your partnership means or what it means. I think it's a question of how you know what a partnership is. One could describe that, but again, then there needs to be some sense of like, you know, how that would be rated against whatever understanding of a partnership, right, or what a blending would look like to meet that.
Does that blending and braiding of funds now fit with those questions we just recreated, where we kind of said it's more about aligning and coordinating systems and leveraging funds than blending and braiding?
Yeah, I mean, to the idea that the goal is about, you know, collective ownership and shared vision and shared outcomes. Like, to me, that doesn't mean as like to have funds blended. That seems like you're working together in some way.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a specific strategy.
But it probably would be important to use the same language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just trying to get at more of the like what would something look like where we have more like less labor intensive things, and then what are the things where we need more labor intensive, particularly noting the fact that out of composite one, it's the exact same set under composite two, but with more pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
So if the top three were ones that were less labor intensive, because it's kind of like, is that possible? And then the bottom three is where there's a little bit more information needed given some of the complexities around the data sources and the data itself and population.
And are there data points for the demonstrating partnerships and demonstrating blending and braiding? Is there data points you would?
Not necessarily data points, but there are ways that hubs can provide evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you would be able to, and then would you be able to show an increase, like in, so like, you know, the little teeny tiny report I do, like I share them the sheer number of agencies I coordinate services with, and then next quarter, hopefully that increases and then increases. Is there something like that? Like if you're given, I'm wondering if like hubs are given a data point and then they're meant to like describe their effort and then look at their indicators of success. Would that happen for each one of the 1, 2, 3, and 4?
I think this may be a place where that timeline would get in the way of that, and it's the need for it to be retrospective rather than prospective, just given the funding timeline.
And thinking about hubs that rural hubs only have so many partners to work with, and so if you're trying to increase the amount of partners by each quarter, you would eventually run out of partners.
And
there are only so many
could
players.
it be a success then that you've reached 90%? Like I'm wondering if that's going to be the rubric, right? So now, like, okay, now I've reached 90%, and I've connected with 90% of the community. Or even if it's like the ASQs or the well babies, like what if thinking about the considerations of the numerator and the denominator, what if the goal is to increase your percentage point? And that becomes the rubric. Did you increase your percentage point by 5%?
That's not possible in some hub regions.
I just want to make sure we capture what Dorothy was suggesting. It sounds like one of the recommendations I was hearing from Dorothy for a final composite is if there's a couple of things where there's really, really simple evidence, we should try to find at least a couple of those things, knowing that there's going to be other areas where there needs to be more complicated narrative.
Thank you for saying that, because I also think that I think for this year, I keep thinking about it as for this year, we have to make choices, and it's going to be a hard choice. So we have to choose for this year, what are the pieces where we want to be able to allow, evidence that might be quickly pulled together by a hub, and other areas where what we want to elicit maybe is a bit more information and maybe even signal that this is a metric that is going to be, down the road, something that I don't know. Does that make sense? Like somehow this allows us to.
Like what we're asking for and measuring this year is potentially going to be different in future years. So
Right.
Know that it's not building on each other.
The other suggestion I was hearing from Dorothy was that maybe the first 3 things in the composite list were places where some pretty simple evidence could be developed.
That's what I was pondering. I mean, as a hub person, I was thinking,
We can capture that as a question because that seems to be something we could work with.
Yeah. I mean, I think speaking as a hub, I could easily pull out, MOUs or declarations of cooperation and pull evidence like statements of work or whatever with our partners to show how we've kind of built partnerships with people in our community. I mean, that would be, but there's like evidence for that, meaning like our statements of work or our MOUs or, I can't think of anything else right now, but it would be like not super hard. It wouldn't require a long narrative. It would just.
Some of it could even be as simple as providing the ELD with some of your sign-in sheets for meetings that show the different sector partners that are participating in the meetings in an ongoing way, and that's measurable and something that most hubs I would think already have in place, a sign-in system, and pretty simple to document and provide.
So it might be that we do have something like a menu of evidence.
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of a rabbit hole. But in thinking about this, so as we try and make them something that's not too much work, and I know last time we talked about, what the funding looks like. Has that been determined by the Early Learning Division as far as, what if all, I can't remember how many hubs there are, it's like, we maybe so that they can be successful. Now, boy, everybody qualified. How's that money? Has that, going to be distributed? Is there that money? Is it, it's based on, how much you get for your, base rate or things like that? Have those already been?
That part was determined by the council, so it ended up being a 5% holdback from coordination funds. So we actually have a list of what that actually looks like. I also want to do attention. We have about 20 minutes left, and I'm wondering if we want to at least take a quick look at the other 2 composites just to see if there's other.
Can I make my comment before I forget it?
Yes.
I'm just thinking about the future, and I'm thinking about how the metrics are reflective of where we are developmentally as hubs. And if we use a composite moving forward and we have something like 3 metrics, 3 pieces of the composite that are reflective of where we are in our developmental stage, like these first 3 around MOUs and partnerships, because that's really where we are. We're trying to focus on building partnerships, and 3 that are more growth-oriented measures, right, that change in the future that may require more. The data sources aren't readily, in a year from now, data sources aren't going to be any better than they are now. They're just not. In 2 years, maybe a little bit better. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, let's hope that they're a lot better, right? But like data systems in a state move really slowly, and so I would encourage us to think about how we set it up this year. May only be this year, but maybe we can think about ways that the composite for future years continue to be some that are reflective of where we are developmentally in our growth, but some that are also a little bit more stretched, that require us to think more broadly about like how are we meeting this target and what are we doing to transform to improve it. I don't know, just a thought.
So just want to capture that. So what I'm hearing is a combination of sort of called age-appropriate measures and growth measures, growth stress
I don't
know.
But I also think you said that
loud.
some of, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Sorry, I can't see the people in the room, so I apologize if I just talked over somebody.
Go ahead.
I think I heard her saying that, but I think also embedded in what you just said is, given that we're not going to fix the data issues, I think there is an element that we're recognizing that some of the transformative work that we want hubs to be doing on these concept areas won't be able to be captured by the data systems we currently have. So
yes,
that there will be a need for some type of qualitative reporting or some type of reporting that'll help be able to capture that transformation and give them credit for it, given that the systems are behind.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, the mindset in composite too.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to, we have 15 minutes. Quick look at 3 and 4. And I'm also sort of thinking ahead, and I just want to throw out a suggestion. I don't think in the next 15 we're going to get down to a very specific recommendation to take to the Early Learning Council at their September retreat. We do have a little bit of time for this topic. What I'm thinking is that maybe what we'll try to do is gather up everything we discussed and produce some kind of report, status report to give to the ELC at its September 26th meeting. I can send that, timeline's a little tight. We can try to put together a report quickly and send it back for feedback, but I think it's just going to, well, given where we are, I think it may just be, staff will have to do its best job of capturing what was said today and sharing that with the council, and then trying to get some feedback from the council to bring back to this committee. It's just sort of my sense of where we are in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sounding reasonable to folks? Okay. Let's take a quick look at 3 and 4. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off any conversation. I'm just trying to figure out how to keep the work flowing with this committee and with the council.
So I guess I had a question with just when I see that saying extra credit. What does that mean?
I liked the concept of extra credit. Wasn't sure how it would be operationalized with the funding for incentives. I actually, in my comments, said the item 7 from composite 4 also sounded like a great extra credit option along with this. Just needed to see how it would fit with the funding of it as an incentive.
Do you have thoughts on how that might work?
Let me get back to it.
That would be next questions for everyone.
Yeah.
One question I have about these, and again, I'm thinking of our hub specifically, but Is it necessary that it be about increase in percentage, or could it potentially be about meeting a specific benchmark? So an example, metric 2.5 about increase the percentage of kids that are registered for kindergarten on time. Based on the data points that I have seen for our area, we're at like 98 point something%. We really don't have that much room for growth, but I'd say 98% is pretty darn good. So is there...
I think the idea was that these were ones that, going back to the committee, there was a recognition that there was important work the hubs was doing in these areas, but there were measurement challenges. So I think this is there a way to reward, recognize as part of this incentive metric process work hubs have done within their community to collect meaningful data in these areas? So I think it's less the baseline and target per se as we can't figure out how to measure this new.
Well, so I like this idea of extra credit, and I really like 7 and giving hubs an opportunity to talk about one of these transformational areas to really highlight how they're transforming work. I do not think it's right for this year. I think it's really hard to figure out how to make this work in this year under the time frame. We can barely figure out how to get a composite together, let alone then figure out an extra credit option. So, I mean, me personally, I would want to table this to figure out how to do something like this for a future year, but this year it seems really challenging given just our conversation trying to figure out what the composite looks like.
Did you skip the composite 4?
Oh, well, I mean, either of them, composite 3 or composite 4, I think.
Because composite 3 is 6. Is question 6 in composite 4?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so, the composite 3, the extra credit piece, like figuring out how that would work, my brain is already hurting thinking about that, trying to think just about what the composite looks like before we get to the extra credit option. And then composite 4, the multiple options, we have the same problems that we talked about in composite 2, that includes composite 2, which is it's a lot of work for a lot of different people. Whereas if we go back to where we were talking about this kind of like mesh of composite 1 and composite 2, where there are some couple measures that are easy to show evidence around and a couple that require a little bit more work.
So my head was kind of going that direction, and so thinking of a different option, which would be like composite 5, which is choose 5 of they do a mixture of composite 2 and 1. Like each hub would maybe choose 5 of the whatever 5, maybe it would be the 5 in composite 2 within the top 3 of composite 1, and then each hub could choose 5 of those 8 options. So it's a blend of like the descriptive narrative components as well as the something just concrete and here you go.
Where you give hubs the choice of what that blend looks like.
Yeah. So if there was a composite 5 option, it might be includes composite 2 and includes the top 3 lines of composite 1. Now each hub choose 5 of those 8 questions.
Oh, but 1, 2, and like for the top 3 of composite 1 or 2.
I know they're the same. They're the same, but they're not, right?
Okay.
I guess
Gotcha.
I'm hearing you say one is like easier to pull out and just show proof of, and the other is more a describe and an indicate. More, quantitative. So basically, you could. So I'm thinking in the end, the reader could do like, you can answer question 1 and 2 in a quantitative way instead of qualitative.
I want to make sure that we don't lose something from this slide. So let's say we just took out the word extra credit and just all those components. Is there anything in either of those things that you want to look at or talk about, or is sort of, do they introduce any important areas of work that haven't been captured earlier. Okay? So I just want to make sure we don't lose that part of the conversation.
I mean, to me, this is, I mean, this is where I'm not a person. It's like, this is seems like a very specific way to get at demonstrating partnership, right? Like or maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, to the point of like, we reached 98% of saturation point around kindergarten enrollment. Like, you know, it's not, I guess your response was that it wasn't about, you wouldn't want to necessarily see the change. It's just more about like demonstrating how you've done it.
So the history of this is, as the previous submetric committee was developing metrics, there were a couple areas that were recognized as important work, but recognized that there were real measurement challenges. No one knew how to track it. So in the existing set of current hub metrics that the hubs have, there were sort of placeholders in there that said, what we're looking for is to come back and hear from you in a year what strategies you've developed in your community to start tracking this information. So this was part of a conversation that was being had with the hubs of, can you figure out ways in your community to track any of this information? So that's sort of the history of those.
So there's some value that you all are looking for by having these responses.
Well, if we're going to have the narrative part and the qualitative, I mean, these, and getting into 7, I mean, 7's the real root of the work for newer hubs that are doing a lot of relationship building and that collective impact and bringing new partners to the table. You know, it might be around that. So having a blend of, you know, what can we pull as far as quick, easy data source, here you go, embed it, or it's a checkbox type item, and then having multiple items that are qualitative, but allowing hubs to select so many of the menu that were really their focus area. So that goes back to that local priority.
So we have 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask a different question than was on the agenda today. But since this ultimately has to go to the council, and the council will make the decision, and we have a chance to update them, are there places where you, as a committee, would like direction from the council about where they want to go? Or let me put it another way. Given that there's still a fair amount of open room, what's the direction that it would be important to know from the council before this committee brings back recommendations and have the council say that they're going to go in another direction?
I think I would love clarity that they are. I'm trying to think of the phrasing here. Not supportive, that they're aware and are in line with our thinking that what we do here is for 1 year, and that we are going to have. They're in line with what our principles are, basically. It's like we've come up with these principles together. They're not going to shift us in a whole different direction. I mean, I'm assuming that that's the case, but like, I don't want the work that we're doing here to really wrestle with all the complexities of this to go, for 1 year, to go there and then them to say, well, what we really, for them to shift into a completely different direction. Or even a slightly different direction, and then we're like, what?
Oh, so, that's a different comment. That's sort of what direction you would like them to take, rather than where if we need clarity.
I was trying to phrase it in a different way.
And that's my assumption, is that part of the goal would be to take those principal statements to the council to make sure that we get adoption.
Yeah. So I guess I'm not necessarily looking for direction, but confirmation or clarity that they're understanding these metrics in the way that we are understanding them, or the purpose behind what we're doing this year and what we're doing in the future. And is that different? I'm not going to tell us.
Well, and to jump on that, I mean, I'd like to, whether this is my right or not, to see this timeline. So, you know, we're talking about these incentive metrics and wanting people to fill this out. It's like, okay, you know, are we working on you know, this all has to be done by June 2017, or, you know, and how do they really think to say, okay, realistically working back, being able to see that part of it too, because it's all going to be flushed down. And one thing in working with different state committees, I would really like this one to have a whole new reputation. So it's like, oh, we really get this stuff, and we understand what we're asking you. It just wasn't people up here, in Salem or Portland, wherever, and this, when they throw it out, and the kind of spray and what we call it, the pray and spray method. You hope it works, and you just spread it out there. Maybe you'll get results. But this really fits. We've got a timeline. We understand, and it's fitting like the things that you're talking about in that. I think that would be great for staff too. For you to say what.
So, any questions you'd like to ask of the council when they meet in September?
I don't know if it's necessarily a question to ask of them, but as a kind of in the back of your mind thought, is it going to be an issue with the council if we come up with recommendations that are very qualitative and they say, what's your dad's source?
So I think that would be an important thing to get a gauge of their sort of sense of balance between qualitative and quantitative.
I think that in kind of looking at languaging of the council, I think an important thing is people want transformative metrics, and they want data to be used and incentives to be used that's tied to data. And so one of the kind of longer term visions is that in order to be able to do that, you have to have the kinds of reliable, valid, standardized data that we're talking about that is tied to the transformation, which requires resources. So not specific to kind of what we're recommending, but in terms of the big picture, I think that's an important thing to bring up and articulate as a, if that is really a goal, then you need to kind of align some of the resources and ways, supporting ways of measurement that are aligned with that goal.
And, I think people forget that. I think there's a sort of a chicken and egg challenge around the data and transformation in the sense that the hubs at the Early Learning Council were created to create greater cross-systems integration, but cross-systems integration, finding measure cross-systems integration when the systems aren't connected yet is a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we will do our best to capture the conversation today, share it with the council. The goal will be to, at a minimum, make sure that the council is on the same page with the principles, guidelines, and approach. And then if we can see if we can get any more specific feedback on some of the specific feedback we got from today, and then sort of play with the timeline sort of based on that. Does that sound like a reasonable place given where we are in the conversation today? Thank you. And then I'll send out an email to see if the 18th works for enough folks to do a joint meeting.
Do we have a date? We probably do, and I cannot remember, and want to make sure I have it for the, do we have a scheduled one?
I need to do a little bit of rescheduling with Pam. Her calendar was pretty tight, and so